You're probably clicking onto this video thinking, what the hell is Tales of Iron? What is that? Well, I was thinking the same thing when I sat down to play it for the first time. All I had seen was one trailer from a few months back depicting a brutal medieval world filled with rats and frogs and dodge rolling? Wait, is this a Souls-like? Despite how popular Dark Souls and the Souls-like genre as a whole has become, and how it seems like any action game that is even slightly difficult inevitably getting compared to the brooding, unforgiving opus from Miyazaki, I still favour every time I get to sit down and experience one of its contemporaries. Okay, I'm just going to give you my high-level thoughts straight off the bat. If you're like me and enjoy punishing 2D action platformers like Hollow Knight, Salt and Sanctuary or Blasphemous, then you'll almost certainly get a kick out of Tales of Iron. And if you've never played any of those titles before, but this looks interesting to you, then I'd say this is worth picking up because this is a great introduction to the genre. While I don't think Tales of Iron is better than most of the games it takes clear inspiration from, it does have enough unique and interesting changes to the Souls formula, as well as a thick coating of charm and quirkiness with its presentation and art style. Okay, let's start off with all the boring stuff, because let's face it, if this doesn't look at least a little interesting to you by now, you probably would have already checked out. Tales of Iron is a brand new 2D action game developed by the 5-man studio Oddbug. The campaign will run you roughly 4 to 5 hours depending on how fast you run through everything and your experience with this genre. All in all, for me to 100% everything in the game, collectibles, side missions, armor sets, and secrets, it took me 5.5 hours. That may seem like a really low number to a lot of you, especially coming from something like Hollow Knight, which can take upwards of 20 hours to complete. On top of that runtime, Tales of Iron offers little to no replayability, with no branching RPG decisions, no stats to level up, or class archetypes to choose from. Personally, I didn't mind the 5-hour runtime or lack of replayability, since this is a discounted title at $25 USD, and I enjoyed almost everything I experienced in those fleeting hours. As for technicals, I'm happy to say this ran at a perfect 60 frames per second on the PS5, and the resolution always looked sharp and the load times were quick. However, I did encounter one freeze during my playthrough when I was loading from one area to another. It's not a big deal since I only lost like 5 minutes, but it's worth mentioning anyway. Okay, so with all that out of the way, let's talk about the actual fun stuff. Tales of Iron opens with a fairly lengthy but impressive cutscene that helps to set the scene. Rats have fought for centuries to repel the ceaseless frog invasions, but peace never lasted long. That is until King Rattus rose to power and unified the rat kingdoms, allowing them to rid themselves of any evil frog kind. For decades then on, the kingdom prospered, but this was short-lived when the king began to grow old and weaken, eventually welcoming back the vengeful frogs. This is where the player character comes in, aka Reggie. On the day of his coronation to become king, the frogs and their war chief break into the Crimson Keep and start laying down havoc. Here you'll have one of those meant-to-lose boss fights that most Souls-likes start off with. Except here you actually have to lose since your attacks don't do any damage to him. You're quickly defeated and left for dead in the courtyard. Before long you awaken to find the entire castle destroyed and overrun with frogs. This is basically where the game starts for real. Everything up until this point is just tutorials and setting up the story. Structurally, Tales of Iron is quite simple. For starters, the main quest objective thing is for you to find your brothers who were taken by the frogs and to rebuild your castle by doing mandatory side missions and helping out your townsfolk. Most of these tasks given to the player boil down to you going to X location and killing a boss or rescuing someone in your garrison, say like one of your brothers for example. The side missions also work exactly like this, with you accepting the mission at one of the many notice boards propped up in each major location. You'll be prompted to go to X location and kill a certain number of enemies or a mini-boss. Completing these quests will reward you with gold pieces that you can spend at certain pivotal moments in the campaign to rebuild your castle. Whereas saving one of your brothers will first reward you with a kitchen, allowing you to give ingredients you've found throughout the world to your brother who is the chef, so he can cook you a meal to permanently buff your health. This is just one of the few upgrade systems Tales has to offer. Another way Tales of Iron is quite simple in its structural approach is how you move throughout the world. There are 3 main locations, each of which are fragmented from each other. They're not connected in any tangible way, meaning the only way to go between them is by fast travelling. I could see this being a disappointment for some that really love the interconnected world building of Dark Souls, or more fittingly Hollow Knight, since there you can move through the entire world without being interrupted at all or seeing a loading screen. But that's not possible here. Most of the big areas will be impressively large within themselves, taking you a good few minutes to sprint through them without taking a break. The reason why I don't mind the disconnected world design here compared to Hollow Knight is because Tales isn't trying to be a platformer, even though there are a few moments where precise platforming is required of you. Additionally, unlike most games in this genre, you're given a map straight off the bat, with all the information you need, even down to a marker revealing where your quest is located. If the world was to be reshuffled and put back together again, the map would likely need to be removed as well to compensate for that change. It's why Hollow Knight asked you to find the cartographer in each region so he can draw you up a map. Like I said earlier, this game will run you 4 to 5 hours to complete, and moving through its world will take you to the likes of lordly chambers decorated with treasure, rain-soaked battlegrounds, ruined watchtowers, and the infested sewers underpinning the Crimson Keep. Needless to say, the visuals on display here are one of my favourite aspects of Tales. The hand-drawn art style is so well detailed while still managing to be simplistic. When combined with the fantastic animation, you get a package that is succinct across the board. But it's the effects that impressed me the most, whether it's the light shafts piercing through the floorboards above, or the moonlight cutting through the foliage at nighttime, or the way rain and the sound design reinforces the oppressive atmosphere, or the green pustule blood that slowly coats your enemies as you hit them, before finally bursting out during an execution. Visually, Tales is just a great looking game that is punching well above its weight, and so is its narration budget.
The Smith was alive, but the key to his freedom was held by Blocky Magoo.
For anyone who didn't get who that was, perhaps the narrator sounds a bit more familiar now.
Squatted atop the tower, croaking orders to his clan.
Yes, that's right, Tales is narrated by Doug Cockle, the man behind Geralt in the Witcher trilogy. Narration is welcome here since Tales has no dialogue between the characters. Instead, the rats communicate with these little text bubbles that give you the required information to understand what's happening, but then the narrator will pipe up to give more context regarding the conversation. Overall, it's a rather simple idea being used, but with the use of impressive writing and Geralt's textured narration really helps to infuse the entire package with even more charm. I know I'm talking about combat rather late into this review, but Souls-like are as much about combat as they are about everything else. I mean, people don't talk about Dark Souls the way that they do because of its combat, at least not in the first game. If you've ever played a game like this before, you'll feel right at home with its use of light and heavy attacks, being able to block, dodge and parry enemy attacks, healing from a finite Estus flask, having to learn enemy attack patterns to beat them, especially bosses, and resting at bonfires. I mean, benches that save your progress. But here they don't respawn all the slain enemies. While much of Tales' combat won't surprise veteran players of the genre, there are a few notable changes that'll switch up how you'll approach combat. The first being the benches that I just mentioned. Here they don't respawn enemies when you rest at them, and they don't refill your Estus flask, they only save your progress. This integration isn't perfect, but we'll come back to that in a minute. Next would have to be the way Estus is used here. Usually healing would be tied to an animation that takes a certain amount of time to complete before healing you. Instead, when you're in the animation here, you're constantly healing, meaning you don't have to commit to a good time to heal, you can just run away and start healing immediately, or even heal between enemy attacks if you want to be more aggressive. Parrying has also been switched up. See, enemies will have a few different types of attack indicators hinting at what to do. No indicator means it's just a regular attack. You can block it, dodge it, or parry it. A red indicator means you can't parry or block, and a red circle means they're about to do a jumping attack which can't be blocked, dodged, or parried, so you need to get as far away as possible. And lastly is the yellow indicator which is telling you to parry, and this parry window feels very generous. I could probably count on one hand how many times I missed a parry. Objectively, these changes make the combat easier than any other Souls-like, since they're kind of like easy mode additions, but that doesn't mean the entire game is a pushover. There are some big difficulty spikes that had me bashing my head up against a brick wall for a while. As you could imagine, these difficulty spikes are obviously the bosses, with their large health pool, high damage output, and varied attack patterns. What can make the bosses more challenging is the rather cheesy AI at times. Like in this fight, the boss just kept spam jumping in the air and locked me in the corner. Sure, it made me be more careful about my positioning, but it felt a bit unfair at times. The difficulty spikes are kind of exacerbated further by the balance being a bit shit on the part of the player as well. Like halfway through the campaign, I fought a boss that only took me 3 attempts to beat, and he dropped a fully upgraded weapon that I used for the rest of my playthrough. Coming back to the benches for a minute, dying sits in a weird place between respawning and reloading your previous save. When you die, important quest items will stay in your inventory, but equipable gear such as swords, shields, and armor don't. So if you save before a boss fight or something, loot a piece of equipment and then die, when you respawn you'll need to reloot what you just picked up. Additionally, since resting at benches saves your progress but doesn't respawn enemies, it rewards you for clearing the path to a boss and then running all the way back to the bench to rest. So if you do happen to die, you won't have to kill all the enemies leading up to the boss again. I really have to question why the save feature functions like this. And the same questionable design applies to the breakable structures that block your path. Once you get a two-handed weapon, you gain the ability to destroy debris that sits in front of passageways. When you break these and then leave the room, when you return, the structure you destroyed is magically restored. Meaning when you're running back and forth between the sewers and the mainland doing side quests, you'll need to destroy the same wooden structures again and again and again. I'm left wondering why the developers have decided to use this mechanic like this. I understand respawning the enemies you've killed when you return to an area, so you keep engaging in the combat, and it helps make the world feel alive. But the structures just feel like a roadblock designed to slow you down. Last but certainly not least is the way Tales handles side missions, or lack thereof, since 90% of the side missions are actually mandatory to progress through the campaign, since they reward you with the gold pieces that you need to rebuild your keep, and there's no other way to earn them. These side missions are basically just MMO style quests that have you killing a group of enemies in a certain location, and since you can only have one mission active at a time, it leads to you running back and forth between the notice board and the sewers. What makes this even more confusing is in your notebook you can see that it looks like you can equip multiple quests at a time, but I can never figure out how this works even when going to a notice board that has multiple quests available at once. You can't select 2 of them at a time, which means when you select one you have to go to the sewers, complete the quest, run all the way back to the notice board to hand in the quest, select that second quest, and then run all the way back to the sewers again just to do that same process. The strange way benches have been designed, the constant respawning of debris and side missions taking you to the same location multiple times in a row really hurts the pacing of the game. I know this only clocks in at 5 hours, but you could trim an hour off this experience and it would be better for it. Overall, combat has some difficulty spikes, some rough pacing in places, but with great animations, a good amount of enemy variety, and just the pure addicting Souls-like combat that I love, makes the combat worth experiencing. It's not revolutionary, and you've almost played this before in plenty of other games, but I still think it's pretty good. On top of that, there's just a lot of charm in this art style and story that helps this stand out from other titles. I really enjoyed my time at this, and I can't wait to see what this small development team does next. Hopefully you enjoyed this review, and I hope you check out Tales of Iron if it looks interesting to you, because it's a great addition to the genre.